Okay. Hello, Karen. You're somebody that I never knew anything about. I don't know your age. I don't remember if my mother and dad knew of you or not. I remember holding Donna in my arms when I was a little girl and she was a little baby. Anyway, to get started, my family here are interested in this, and I'm going to have to make a family history before I start your questions, because my family want it for their help as well. My grandparents, Edwin and Mary Elizabeth Goodman Trenner, moved from comfortable Cincinnati, Ohio, to Marion, Kansas, way back, just following the Civil War. Grandfather had served in the Union Army as a quartermaster, and the war was over, and he came back to Cincinnati, and their marriage took place, and they decided to move to Kansas. Their first home there was a sod house, not comfortable city living by any means, and Grandfather was not happy about keeping his bride in a sod house, but their house in town was not completed, and they had to wait for it. When it was possible to move into Marion itself, they were in a very nice, decent, well-designed home, and it was there that my Uncle George was born, and my Aunt Alice, that is your great-grandmother. It was 7 more years before my mother was born, and her name was Anna, as you know. The 2 older ones finished their schooling, and Grandfather financed George to become an optometrist. When he asked Alice what she wanted, she had been studying piano as much as the teacher in Marion could teach her, but she wanted more, and asked if she could go where she could have finer instruction. So Grandfather moved her to Topeka, Kansas, and there was a fine teacher there, and Aunt Alice forwarded her music education. Somewhere along the line, the Clarks and the Trenners, as families, knew each other well, and Alice and Milton courted and married. They lived in Topeka because Milton was employed in the bank there. That's where my cousin Milton and my cousin Roland and my cousin Raymond, that we called Bud, they were all born there. And that kind of gives you a background for how my mother was continuing to be attached in Kansas. My grandmother, meanwhile, had to take on George's 2 daughters, born to his first wife. Their names were Rachel and Elizabeth, that they called Bessie, and the mother was called Bessie. That second pregnancy ended disastrously. That Bessie survived as a very premature baby, but the mother perished, and the complications were great. Uncle George brought his 2 daughters to Grandma Trenner, and she raised those 2 girls to a point where even Bessie remembered her as she grew up. Grandma had a stroke that took her life, and that happened down the road a few years. When Mother was old enough that her father, my grandfather, asked her what she wanted him to provide for her, it wasn't more music. She wanted to go to college. That was expensive, and he didn't have that much money. She said she'd work too. So he sent her off to Park College and helped her with her expenses, but she taught piano lessons and she knew shorthand and typing, so she was able to do some secretarial work, and one way and another her expenses at college were being paid. In the meanwhile, Grandma died, but Mother had also had some illnesses that interrupted her education. She had typhoid fever and was out of college for almost a year. Then there was the timing taking care of her mother before Grandma died of that stroke that took her. But Mother made it back to college, and while it took her 6 years to finish the 4-year course, she got her degree with honors. My father was enrolled there, and illnesses had interrupted his going through college, so that they both graduated at the same time in 1906, and he and Mother had some agreement going that they were going to marry, but they did not announce their engagement because Dad was going to be in seminary for 3 years, and long engagements were frowned on in that generation. Mother took a position as a confidential secretary to a college president in Hastings, Nebraska. She was there for over 2 years when Grandpa Treader had an accident that caused him to need some help for a good many months, and so she gave up her job and went to help take care of him. In the meanwhile of this, Aunt Alice was raising Milton and Roland and Raymond in Topeka. Okay, when Dad graduated from seminary, he came to claim his bride, and Alice gave her the wedding. Little Rachel and Bessie were visiting at the time of the wedding. And it's interesting that a wedding picture has more children than grown-ups in it, but for their wedding trip to the West Coast, Mom and Dad were taking Rachel and Bessie back to their father in Denver, and because George had not come to the wedding. And so they dropped the children off in Denver and continued on their trip to where Daddy was to pastor a church for the next 2 years in Layton, California. In Layton, Edwin, my oldest brother Edwin, was born, and 3 years later Gordon was born, and in that timing they were accepted to the mission work in New Mexico among the Navajo Indians. The Presbyterian Board of Home Missions sent them there. They were told that they would have to raise a garden for their own food and get along on an awfully small salary. I seem to remember that their first salary was $60 a month. Out of that, they would have to pay an interpreter to help them with the language and anything else that went on. Daddy had to buy a horse to pull the buggy that they had for transportation. That horse was also a riding horse, and I have a picture of my daddy riding him. The horse's name was Prince. Mother found that she was going to have to plant her garden all right. Middle of July, or maybe early July, in 1916. Gordon is 4 months old. Of course, Ed just a little over 3 years. Mother was very gratified to learn that their predecessors in that ranch home had planted a small orchard. Fruit was coming on. It was a small orchard, 1 or 2 apple trees, a peach, a pear, and a plum tree, a cherry tree, the sour variety you use for pies. There was also a Concord grape arbor established, but it wasn't a good year for the grapes when they got there, and Mother did not get much grape help that year. But the fruit came on. They were not prepared to keep it, and they had to get jars and stuff bought in, which took from Daddy's salary pretty badly. Mother had planted carrots and beets and lettuce and spinach and so on, because they will grow anytime it's warm and they can be watered. But she had snuck in 2 packets of seed that she didn't even tell Daddy, and she walked to the river bank. The San Juan River was not far. She walked and planted those seeds and kept track of their progress if they were going to grow. Of course they grew. Oh, did they grow! That year they came up and actually showed seeding, which meant that the next spring they would come up with what was wanted. Next spring, Mother went to her plantings at the river and had asparagus, a gourmet vegetable. Then and even now, that asparagus loved the San Juan River. It traveled fast. By the time my folks moved from the ranch into the little town of Shiprock, the asparagus had gotten there too. I cannot remember a time that we didn't have asparagus in season, thanks to Mother bringing 20 cents worth of seed when she went to the field. If that asparagus kept its course going along that river, over into Arizona and onward, it very well may be in the Grand Canyon today. That's 95 years it's had to get there, and it probably made it well before this if it was going to make it at all. If anybody over there wonders how it got there, they can thank my mother. Anyway, they had mutton for meat, and the food they could raise, and the shopping they could do in Farmington that you mentioned. That was well off the reservation, and it was hard to get there by horse and buggy. The roads were not like present times. But when they went, they knew some missionaries that were working in an off-the-reservation capacity, and Daddy was well respected up that way, although it wasn't where his ministry lay. but I can remember him being a guest speaker in the Little Presbyterian Church and in the Methodist Church. The Baptists didn't want anything to do with a Presbyterian because we believed in sprinkling for baptism. The work on the reservation was hard, but they kept at it. The language was tough, and they never got where they could independently preach in it. They used interpreters all the time. Mother would go out in the afternoons and take an interpreter with her and teach in the Indian homes, and Daddy was doing much the same thing. And my first memories of getting around were that horse and buggy. I remember it well. Daddy didn't get a hold of a car anytime real early, but he was the architect and the chief foreman building the church, a little brick structure in Shiprock, and of course he was its pastor the entire time that they lived there. Sundays, Wednesdays, whatever else, there were some weddings there. My mother played for them. I can remember that. And I played for one after I became good enough to get it done. There was a bell tower, but we were never provided with a bell to put in it. The Indian children from the school came to us for Sunday services, and their chaperones, and anybody that wanted to come, of course, was perfectly welcome. And my daddy tried to gear his messages to helping whoever would drop by. He was a good preacher. I learned to play the piano. My mother was, of course, my first teacher. And I took over some of the services. Mother's health was not good, but she stuck it out for a lot of years. And Daddy's health was not good, but he stuck it out for a lot of years. He was plagued with hay fever from Russian thistle, which is common old tumbleweed. And it was there the year around, so he had hay fever the year around. He had it violently. At any rate, you asked on your questionnaire about where he preached. He did not keep a journal, and he was it would have filled the house if he had. He was a very busy man. Then you had also asked if he ministered in Farmington, and I think only in a guest capacity. You asked if he ministered at Window Rock. There was a family named Clark there. They're not connected with your Clarks. They had a very thriving ministry there, but it resembled my daddy's Sundays and midweek, and they didn't trade off, so Daddy didn't minister there to my memory. But we knew the Clarks and occasionally got to visit there, and their sons and daughter were nice for my brothers and me because we did not have very many friends. We had to kind of get along without that. You asked about revival. There were not a lot of Christians present when my folks went there, and that revival implies that there are Christians needing to be built up. There were conversions. The Navajos were difficult to get through to. They were polite in listening to your message, but they wanted to believe it in addition to their own religion, not in place of what they'd been brought up with. They didn't wish to give up anything to become a Christian. So it was a very difficult ministry. When my parents had to leave, they kept contact for a while, and then the people that were willing to write to them, one by one passed away till hardly any were left. I remember our first car. It was a Model T Ford. Daddy ran it to death and was unable to get a second one and ran it to death. There were other cars later, and I can't tell you the names of them. Cars were coming along in the 1920s and the early 30s, and it was something that you could have, but roads were dreadful and tore up a car terribly. So that the life of a car on that desert was a short life. But we were able to do a wider ministry in having the car instead of horse and buggy. I think that I may have gone over everything, but number one, I was born in the little ranch house by kerosene light. The doctor from the government hospital in Shiprock could not admit Mother to the hospital because she wasn't an Indian. But he took time off duty and brought a nurse to be off duty, and what you did on their private time was their business. They came up and delivered Mother at the ranch house. So I was born that kind of a way, and Mother had her little daughter that she wanted. They had always wanted a girl, and Daddy had said that I was to be named Mildred Louise for the people of his family. And the first boy came, and the second boy came, and they finally got their Mildred Louise. I think I've covered what you asked in your questions, and I'm not sure if I've given everything I'd like to give about the earlier family history. You should know something about my father. He was born the same year, 1882, as my mother. And his parents, he was the fifth in the family. It was a farming family in central Illinois. His parents perished in the flu epidemic of 1884, I think they called it. And the older children were placed in farm community homes where they could be workers, but Dad was the baby. They couldn't find a place that would take a baby to raise, and the three Campbell sisters, unmarried ladies, agreed to take him, and Aunt Mattie, her real name Martha, Aunt Mattie Campbell, legally adopted my dad. And his name was Charles Lancaster Campbell. She raised him, put him through college, put him through seminary, and then he got started in the ministry. We met up with Lancasters when we lived in Illinois and used to go to the family picnics. And I just think it's right for you to know that I had a daddy, all right, and that he was a wonderful missionary, and that he was raised by Christian people, even though he didn't really know his own people. And Mother and Daddy loved each other dearly, and Mother missed him terribly when he went. Mother lived 7 more years, and she was practically blind at her death. but she made it to almost 92, and here I am traveling along. I've just lost my second brother this year. He was 16 days off of being 95. We, Treader Campbells tend to stick around a while, and Gordon is a wonderful man in his own right. My brother Ed died of asbestos cancer when he was in his 70s. We've been without Ed for a long time. I think that this introduces me, and it might be that I never get any more connection with you, and my gang will probably ask me a load of questions and build onto this again, but I hope that I answer the things. Oh, one thing I want to stick in here if I get it. You're going to go to Four Corners at the end of this very week, and it was fun for us, but it was a nothing for most people. That far back, all the government survey people had ever done was to put a cement pillar where the 4 states were supposed to come together at right angles. The only place in the United States that this happens. And they had a metal plate stuck in the cement to show Colorado, south to New Mexico, west to Arizona, north to Utah on that plus sign for a map. We would go there, and there was a little fence you had to get through. That was all that was protecting that pillar. But we would climb on the pillar and be sitting in 4 states at once. We took friends there so that they could drive away saying that they had had a big trip and been in 4 states at once without moving. It was, they have made a real tourist attraction of it now, but there was nothing there and no guard to keep you from. I don't know if they let people go sit on that pillar now. In fact, I was told that they resurveyed and found they had to move the pillar about 50 yards somewhere. I don't know why that was, but if it's true, they've also protected it, and I doubt that the public gets to go in there and sit in 4 states at once. I don't know that, I just doubt it. But they've made quite a place with a trading post and a this and a that, and people do go there for the curiosity of the place. It's just a few miles from Twin Falls in the mountain, and we used to drive there. It was pretty, a waterfall, a double waterfall, and we used to think that was a nice trip to take if we could afford the gas to get there. But you're going to Four Corners, so I thought I'd stick this in. And I think my granddaughter is, she's signaling that I can wander on, but I don't know what else I want to try to put into this.
Did you do your...
You get a picture of how we've come along. If you want me to fill you in on my family, I have 4 sons. The first and third and fourth are nearby me here, and their families. And my second son is a Vietnam veteran and casualty. He is alive, but he is a wheelchair patient in a VA hospital in Maryland. And everything connected with it stemmed from his service in the Vietnam War. So he didn't get to live the kind of life his brothers got to live. My family are Christian people. I am greatly blessed that my family are Christian people. My grandson with whom I'm living is taking courses to be a licensed preacher. He is very active in the little church that he serves. And my granddaughter types up their programs and does this kind of stuff, whatever. And there are the two little great-grands. They are little rascals. Okay. Oh, she's gotten onto some things that I'm supposed to... I gave the asparagus story.
Oh, did you? Okay.
There's the little Indian girl that was the daughter to a helper my mother had, an interpreter. We as babies were in two playpens, and we passed our toys back and forth, and I'm not quite sure how my granddaughter here found out about that one. But then she wanted me to bring out, my mother was a good cook when she had the ingredients to do it with, and she baked all our bread. She made our cinnamon rolls and biscuits and bread, and and when we were going to, when kids were going to that little one-room school, we were living in property across from the school building by that time, and Mother, on one Valentine's Day, had baked cookies, heart-shaped cookies. My dad didn't know that it was for the school, and he came in the house, and he ate quite a few cookies, and they were barely enough for the student body. When Mother caught it and got him stopped, there was a cookie for each child and no more. And so that was a story. Daddy never ate cookies without permission. Again. You can believe it. She has jotted down my life after New Mexico. Well, when I graduated from Wheaton College, I worked for 1 year in the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago. I got an opportunity to go teach music at Columbia Bible College in Columbia, South Carolina, and I signed up for the master's program in Bible while I was there. While I have time to throw it in, one of cousin Rachel's I don't know, maybe granddaughter, came to Bible college. And that was a big surprise, getting together like that. Rachel gone, but it had to be her granddaughter in Bible college. I met my husband at Bible college, and we served the Lord in all the ways we knew how to do. But he died of a heart attack when he was still 51. And so I've been widowed longer than I was married, but my sons were not little children. 3 of them were young adult, and the 4th one was still in school. And so that's the way the Leaches are. My husband's people live in West Virginia, and they have Indian in their blood, so my children and their children have Indian in their blood. It's coming full circle, isn't it? The Indian for them is Oklahoma and east of Oklahoma Indians, I suppose Cherokee. I don't know it, but my husband was about 1/4 and that would make my children 1/8. And my Bill that you've contacted, he's Paul William Jr., and we called him Bill for his middle name. His children are still 1/8 because wife Gloria is an 8. And so that doesn't make them a 16th. It makes the grandchildren there the same amount as two parents contributing. So there's Indian, not in my blood, but along the way I've acquired some. Of course it isn't Navajo, but the Lord loves them all. And I'm very thrilled that you, with some Indian to speak of in your roots, are interested in our Navajo people. They are still a needy people. They are a huge tribe, the largest in the country, and they have been through a lot. You spoke of Chinle and Canyon de Chelly. I have always admired the Navajos that stayed in that canyon and avoided being taken, captured and taken by Kit Carson in some old days of the Army trying to break up Indians fighting Indians in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah and Nevada. There was fighting going on among the Indians, and to break it up, the United States Army just kidnapped a lot of Indians and took them kind of prisoner, and they returned them to their roots later. But the ones in Canyon de Chelly were spared from that imprisonment and lived on, living like the Hopi and other Pueblo Indians. I've always admired the fortitude they showed in being able to live like that. Canyon de Chelly is a kind of a pretty place on the reservation. There's a lot of red rock around there, and the desert is red sand in many places. I don't know how to... my granddaughter has left the scene, and this camera may be still going, and it may not. I don't know what's happening, but I could wander on and tell things forever, and I just don't know how much of it is going to last. I'll say a goodbye just in case it's running out. I can't tell myself. I wish I had your mailing address, even a common ordinary telephone number, because I'm not good at this modern stuff, and I can't get good at it at this age of my life. I'm assuming that you're living in central United States. But just in case you're in California, why, fine and dandy. It's a big country. I miss it and would mind being healthy enough to get there. I've had strokes, and I'm not able to walk alone. I have to be assisted either by my walker. Oh, I nearly forgot to hold this up. I hope I'm still, if I hold this right, I hope you get the picture. My parents were in their earliest 60s, taken in Illinois, and I just don't know. They're Daddy and Mom, and they're sweet people, and I hope that you getting this on camera, I don't know. Chris, I think I've about run out of steam.
Grandma's done. Hold on a sec.
Find out if this picture is on.
Alright, I'm going to zoom in. There we go. Okay, done. You're done.
There she is, Anna Trenner Campbell and Charles Lancaster Campbell. Campbell was the name we went by, but Lancaster is in our heritage. Am I still supposed to be filling in here, Chris?
Hold on. Are you done?
I don't know what I'm doing.
Are you done?
Is it done?
Are you done?
There's nothing. So Karen, would you provide us with something beside the email? That's okay for the young folks, but it doesn't help me much. I need an address. Even a phone number would make me feel connected. And I don't know that I'll call you. Lord bless your trip. I hope you get this before you go, and that you have time to listen to it.
All right.